Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome again to the broadcast this evening. We're excited to be back. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Pleasure seeing you again.
Yes, sir. I was about to start sending out a search party. People will be saying, where's the prof?
I'm here, reported back to duty.
Yes, fantastic. It's so good to have you back here on the program again. And just before we go on, just want to say to those that I can see that there's some people already on YouTube, please do share the links. Remind people that the prof is back, the program is back, and it's going to be fun. There's some questions we have for you, sir, from some events that happened while you were on break. But let me ask, how was your break, sir?
I discovered one eternal truth. When your preoccupation in life involves using the brain, intellectual exercise, you are never on break, because the brain itself wants to keep engaged with what's going on in the world. It's different if you're a footballer or you're a tennis player, maybe apart from just working on the muscles, you take things easy. But with this intellectual preoccupation with the world, you keep all your television sets on, perhaps to make sure that no fool blows up the world while you are having a nap. And you wake up, in the other place. But, you don't want to miss any development. So frankly, this brain didn't take a break.
Sir, well, I won't comment on that, sir, but maybe another break is required then, so the brain can take some break. But it's so good to have you back. Thank you for being here this evening. So there's a lot that has happened over the period you've been away, and maybe we should start with some of the conversations around. Let's start with the elections in Kenya. Let's start with Africa today, sir. We have seen what some have said has been a complete departure from the norm. But let me not go too far into that. Sir, what is your take on what has happened in Kenya? Someone who people thought couldn't win has won. And what does that signify for Africa and other hopefuls who may be thinking they also want to be part of, they want to take part in an election? What is your view on what has happened in Kenya, sir?
I will say that it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. There are different stages to the electoral process. Before the elections, the period of the campaign, and of course, the post-election period. I might even say four periods. The actual culmination of the process of voting. Everything went off very well in Kenya during the campaign. No violence. Yes, the elections were not completely issue-oriented, but then no campaign anywhere in the world is ever completely, issue-oriented. But it was not focused on the usual issue in Africa, which is ethnicity. or what people call tribalism. Nobody actually brought that up in his invidious process. Yes, there were misinformation using the social media, but then again, this is something that happens all over the world. You can't avoid it. Different constituencies had their own social media that they were using and planting, but it's still within moderation. And then came the day that the result was supposed to be announced. And there we all were. We all sat down, some with their glasses of beer, some, I suppose, with gin and tonic and what have you. And the first indication that, wait a minute, something wasn't going right was when the deadline for announcement kept being pushed forward, because the system put in place, and one must give credit to the electoral committee, the electoral body in Kenya, from the polling booth where votes were recorded and counted, and where they got all agents of the parties to sign on. When it was fed into the portal, the computerized portal of the election body, it was open to everybody. Everybody, even if you were not in Kenya, could download. And so you had access to that thing that was signed, or to the end where the compilation was taking place. So there was, I mean, you could follow the results as more and more more and more of those papers. Therefore, I simply thought it was going to be even open to the blind what the result was going to be. And then all of a sudden, you saw chairs being thrown. You saw punches being, and soldiers and policemen rushing in. You didn't know what was going on. Although immediately, I put two and two together and I got four. Because William Ruto, one of the candidates, his motorcade had turned up an hour before and simply waited. The other candidate didn't show up, and that was Raila Odinga. He didn't show up for 1 hour. So I suspected who the aggrieved party was going to be. But on what grounds? Everything was so transparent, so honest, that even some of the analysts based overseas were saying, what's anybody complaining about? This was so transparent. And then you had the resignation of those 4 commissioners, 4 out of 7, leaving only 3. And that was a sad time, not only for Kenyans, but for we Africans who had been applauding this marvelous performance in Kenya. And then the announcement was made, but the shine had been taken off the announcement. It was a pity. But we will leave it to the Supreme Court to judge. However, one must not, at least I will still give credit to where credit is due. Ruto's performance must be applauded. Not because it was a landslide, it wasn't. He won by the whiskers, the cat whiskers. He won by the whiskers. But he took on the president of the republic who was opposed to him. He took on the main opposition in Kenya, which is, the Luos. He took on the dynasties. Three families had been ruling or had been dominating Kenyan political system since independence. The Kenyatta dynasty, the Odinga dynasty, and the Moi dynasty. And here comes somebody who didn't belong to those dynasties. Yes, he'd been as an adjunct of, one candidate or the other, but he didn't belong. In fact, President Moi once described him as your upstart from a pauper. That's the way he once described Ruto. And yet this pauper, this upstart from a pauper took on 3 dynasties and defeated them. So let's not, take away from his victory. I hope, and I'm glad that so far there hasn't been violence of a magnitude. A few punches, chairs, a few stones, and what have you. But compared with what we've had in the past, we can say that, thank God, there hasn't been violence. And I hope whatever decision the Supreme Court then takes, 2 things. I hope the Supreme Court members will show the same integrity as the chairman of the electoral body, whom Ruto described as a hero of the whole exercise. I hope the Supreme Court judges will step up to the plate and also show integrity and courage. Violence in Kenya's electoral process often makes it difficult for somebody to risk his life, to show courage. But I hope they will do. And at the end of the day, I hope Kenya will move on and will now be an example worthy of being copied by other African countries.
So one area that people have talked about is the use of technology in transmitting the electoral results to the center. And they've questioned that some other countries in Africa find it difficult to implement similar technology. Do you think with this Kenya situation, a lot more African countries are likely to start to warm up to technology in their electoral process and in the reporting of the results like has been done in Kenya? Or are we still going to stand back to say we want to do it manually?
No, I hope, and that's why I say the role of the Supreme Court, Kenya, is going to be critical. If the Supreme Court in Kenya comes to a conclusion that the result has credibility because the process had credibility, then that will be an encouragement to other African countries. I know of a particular country where it was used, but when the electoral body at the last minute, lost courage and claimed that they couldn't find the server, that they didn't have the server, or that their server broke down. I mean, you know, of course, if you say you don't have the server or that your server broke down, what do you expect the court to say? That your server didn't break down, unless they are going to now bring in super IT people to claim no, because the server was there all along. If there is no such vinegaring, then you don't have any problem. And I hope other African countries will use technology to give themselves credibility in the voting process, the transmission process, and the counting process.
One of the questions about that Kenyan situation is, to what extent do you think that Ruto being in government helped him to achieve the outcome he's now achieved? So even if he was fighting the same ideals and was still pushing that to the people, and they were embracing him for those ideals, if he wasn't in government, would it still have been easy for him to make it through?
Well, I don't know about being easy, but I think he still would have made it through, because he was taking on the establishment. He was taking on the system. There's no way, when you are fighting the president of the republic, fighting the civil service, that they will give you access to those computers, if that is where what you are implying. No, I think, and as I said, he didn't win. He didn't win by a landslide. He barely squeezed through. So I think that he's been a vice president didn't make any difference. On the contrary, if he had not been in government, in fact, what people will not be saying is, oh, will he have the experience to help Kenya tackle the enormous economic problems that Kenya faces? Now you cannot make, and I like his statement, his concession or his victory statement, that from day one, he will build on the achievements that Uhuru Kenyatta and I like that, and I, in the past 9 years, have achieved for Kenya. So the experience is definitely going to be beneficial to Kenya, but he can claim he won cleanly.
Thank you for that, sir. While we're talking about Africa, I think it would be a good segue, sir, to look at foreign policy of the United States in relation to Africa, and what we're also seeing with the visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. And the reason I bring those two together, sir, is because on the one hand, in Ghana, we had this issue of an agreement that Ghana had signed with the United States, and what is now happening in Taiwan. So, sir, if we start with the Africa position, and then we talk about Pelosi, what is your take on that African situation and the Ghanaian agreement?
The position where Africa finds itself today, to me, it's it's a position to be envied, because as of now, there is this, if you like, there is this window of opportunity where Africa does not belong to America or Russia or China. There are African countries that have economic relationship, strong economic relationship with the United States. There are African countries where China has made inroads economically, infrastructural development, and there are African countries where Russia is making military inroads to help the governments to fight insurgency, fight terrorism, and what have you. But because the three superpowers, let me put it that way, are spreading themselves thin, it allows smart African countries with smart leadership to actually build foreign and strategic policies towards these three giants of the world to, if you like, cleverly exploit the differences between them without their souls to any of the three. Now, there is, of course, a pushback by, you see, a year ago, in fact, I think at the beginning of this podcast, you asked me a question where I said the world order was now characterized by a descending power and an ascending power, and that the most dangerous time for the world is when the two kind of meet, and there may be a miscalculation of one challenging the other, either to stop the ascension or thinking that the descent is irreversible to challenge the descending power. I said that about a year ago. Of course, since then, so many factors have come in. At that time, we didn't have COVID-19, and at that time, we didn't have the Russian-Ukrainian war. I mean, these are major things that have so shaken up, unscrambled the world order, and we simply don't really now know what the outcome will be. However, what I cautioned against is starting to happen. And this is where the Pelosi visit, and there have been some American senators who have gone on to Taiwan. That was a provocation. It was unnecessary. And I mean, one must be frank, one must be that even the Biden administration thought it was a reckless move by Nancy Pelosi. But you see, given the American system, and again, I must continue to say this, the stupidity of American Congress people never stops to surprise me. That visit was unnecessary. It was a provocation. You are challenging China to show whether it is really powerful enough to take on the United States. It's so unnecessary. I think that China behaved with more wisdom than the United States did, because there are things China could have done to militarily challenge that flight, and who now knows what to the end of it will have been. But one thing I have learned from my own interaction with Chinese diplomats, and this is an interaction that goes back to 1978, 79. They are not really in a hurry. They have this, I call it confidence. You may say that they are overconfident, or it's unnecessary pride or unnecessary arrogance on their part. But they have this idea that, why should we rush? The future belongs to us. So what's the point of rushing to claim where we will get there ultimately? And that's why they chose the option of having military exercises. But I think that the Congress people, and that includes the senators as well, shouldn't push their luck too far. Somebody may make a mistake, unless they want to, of course, unless they want to be well, to the Americans, maybe they'll be heroes. They may be the people who started the Third World War, and we're not likely to regard them as heroes. The American pullback or pushback towards the unraveling of the world order, as exemplified by what you had referred to in Africa. They had shown a military atmosphere, military parameters. More American troops have been sent back to Somalia, where under Clinton, American troops had been pulled out. Of course, you had the setting up of the African Command of the United States military establishment. And then this, which we had never, Africa had been independent for about 60 years. We have never had an American military agreement with an African country that basically reduces that African country to, what will we call it? An eradication of its sovereignty. Reduces that African country to a puppet of the United States. And I'm referring to what you call the military agreement with Ghana. Now, what is in this agreement? Quickly, to run through. It's even worse. We've been talking about the French Colonial Act on this podcast several times. This American military agreement with Ghana is worse than that. If you can imagine anything being worse than the French colonial act. A section of the Kotoka International Airport will be ceded to the American military. And there, the sovereign control by the United States will be total. In what ways? Once it has been ceded to America, Ghana does not have any governmental authority over that area again. The United States could bring in anything that it likes to that section of the airport. Number two, no Ghanaian official or civilian or citizen will have access to that section of the airport without American approval. Thirdly, if there is a clash between, excuse me, a Ghanaian and an American, the Ghanaian will be tried under American law by American officials, in spite of the fact that the act took place on Ghanaian soil. And if it's an American who is accused of, inflicting any unsavory act on a Ghanaian, that American will still be tried by Americans under American law, not under Ghanaian law. Please, this reduces Ghana completely and totally American colony. I'm aware there are examples one could cite of problems between the Ghanaian, between American military personnel in Philippines, and also I think in Okinawa, where, wherever you have men and women, they will date each other. But when female Filipinos or female Okinawans then complain about unsavory sexual activity by the American servicemen, the servicemen will run back to their base, and access will not be given to the policing of the Philippines or the Okinawans. That's the only thing I can remember equivalent to this. Why? After 60 years, Ghana of Nkrumah, who led the flag of modern African nationalism, I think there was a Ghanaian group who took the case to court, and the court ruled against the Ghanaians on some technical ground, which I can understand, because usually when it comes to foreign policy and security issues, the government is usually given wide latitude, to operate. But the Ghanaian court, itself was the one that threw out the petition by the Ghanaians against this military pact. So you are having American response to the challenges coming from Russia and China in a military rather than in an economic area. And that's the United States is likely to get a massive pushback by Africans. And when I say massive pushback, I don't mean that Africans will take on the United States militarily. But go and read the speech given by the South African foreign minister to the visit by the American Secretary of State to South Africa, that she does not expect, and she wouldn't expect the American Secretary of State to tell South Africa what side of any international dispute South Africa should take. That is what enlightened Africans are likely to be saying to the United States.
But, sir, I have a question here, sir. I think it's December 13 to 15. The United States is calling for an African summit. And there was something that the one of the diplomats said, and I'll just read that to you, sir. He said here that the US-Africa summit is not all about Beijing. We're not asking our African partners to choose. We believe the United States offers a better model, but we are not asking our African partners to choose. What better model could they be referring to, sir?
No, you should tell me, or whichever American official said that should tell us what is the better American model. I just referred to their increasing their military presence in Somalia. I just made reference to setting up the African Command as a, an appendage of Pentagon. I just made a reference to this military agreement, which 60 years after African independence is being foisted. Well, I shouldn't say it's being foisted. I don't know who called for it. So obviously it's being done with compliance of the United States. So I don't know what they mean by they having a better model. And as far as this concept of joint summits, African United States leadership summit, I think Africa is selling itself out cheaply, because now we have African Chinese leadership summit, we have African Japanese leadership summit, we have African Turkey leadership summit, we have African United States leadership summit. Have I mentioned France? We have African French leadership summit. And of course, we have the Commonwealth Summit. But the Commonwealth Summit is a totally different model, in the sense that even though non-English speaking African countries are now applying and being allowed to join the Commonwealth, at least the summit is rotated amongst member states. The last one being held in Kigali in Rwanda, rather than these ones where you are summoned to Peking, summoned to Paris, summoned to Washington, summoned to Istanbul. I think Africa is selling itself out cheaply. Really, I think the Africans at the summit of the African Union ought to take a stand on this proliferation of African-X summits, I don't think it spells well for African respect and African sovereignty.
Well, let's go to the United States, sir, and let's deal with one of the big issues, the raid on the home of a former president by the FBI. Some have welcomed it. Some have said, how could that be done to a former president of the United States? What are your views on that raid that took place and what that means for American democracy going forward?
This is a difficult question to attempt to answer. And I'm going to attempt the answer like an economist. On one hand, on the other hand, I remember Truman, one of the down-to-earth American presidents, who at a cabinet meeting asked the question about the economy, and I think one of the cabinet members, whether it's the financial secretary or something, said, well, Mr. President, on one hand and on the other hand, and Truman said, for God's sake, can you find me an economist with one hand? So, on one hand, it must be a nightmare for the justice establishment, because the home of a former president had never been raided. Never. Because you want to respect the sanctity of that office, which is supposed to continue even after the president has left office. Two, you don't want to give the impression that America has become a banana republic, where when an opposition party wins an election, it can then run after the losing party as if it's out to persecute politically. But on the other hand, the survivor of the republic, the United States, is more paramount than the personality of a former president. The survivor of the United States, a situation where nuclear secrets, atomic weapons secrets, and we still don't know which type, how extensive these secrets are. Do they involve the code by which atomic weapons are launched? We don't know yet. But I assume that what they put before the judge, before he signed on to the warrant, in fact, there were two stages the FBI went through. Stage one was persuading the Secretary for Justice, which in other countries we will call the Minister of Justice of the United States, to sign on to authorize the search, or to authorize that an application should be made to a judge. Don't forget that the present Secretary of Justice in the United States was a former appeals court judge. It wasn't just one of these, one of these lawyers that Trump used to pick beside the road to make Secretary for Justice. No. His status was that of a Court of Appeals judge. In fact, Obama recommended him to be promoted to the Supreme Court. The Republicans playing a political game for 1 year held that post open in the hope that they will win the election, which they won. So there were built-in hedges, and then the warrant was then taken to another High Court judge who was persuaded by the evidence put before him that they needed to do this. If you put two and two together, the evidence must be weighty. Indeed, the danger to the Republic must be so evident to these two judicial figures as for them to have authorized the search. And if it turns out that actually there were secret nuclear documents that Trump away from the White House to his own private residence, for what purpose? Supposing there's been a burglary in his house by terrorists and they had gone away with those nuclear documents. What did he himself intend to do? What did he intend to do with those documents? Sell it to the highest bidder? There's been this cloud over Trump as to whether he's a spy, as to whether it's a spy for Russia. There's been, but these documents going to be passed on to Putin. So I think that the United States is in a very dangerous phase of its own history. And unfortunately, things have got to that stage in the United States where when it is 12 noon and a party says it is 12 noon, expect the other party to say, no, it is 12 midnight. Can't agree on being able to read the clock. So we'll be here and hear the judgment of the court as the process develops.
Thank you, sir. Well, as we round up for tonight, let's talk about the United Kingdom a little bit. But then there's an interesting fun fact that I want to throw out there. I hear that 2,500 Ukrainians have asked our outgoing prime minister to come and be their prime minister. What should Mr. Johnson do?
See what happens to you when you get attacked by the Russians. Your brains takes leave of you. Any country that has Boris Johnson to come and be their prime minister needs to have their heads examined. Well, I hope the Queen will sign his exit visa.
But sir, the UK is facing the hard reality of of another prime minister before the end of the year. What are your views on what is going on? We've got Rishi Sunak, we've got Liz Truss there, and by September, we would know who the new prime minister is going to be. What do you think this is going to mean for UK foreign policy? Liz Truss herself being the current foreign secretary in that sense. But what is it going to mean for the United Kingdom? Whichever way the pendulum swings, it's a major shift in the role of the prime minister. What are your views on that, sir?
No, I think the decision is around the corner. Why don't we just wait and see, which way the role of the dice goes? Old men like me tend now to be patient, while you young ones can hardly wait for the final whistle to be blown before you find out whether your football team is at the bottom of the league or your two coaches are going to be exchanging blows on the sideline. So let's wait. Let's wait.
Since you mentioned the analogy of a footballer, did I hear somewhere that you were a supporter of Manchester United?
I have no comments.
Oh, let's move on. Let's move on.
Let's move on.
Let's go to China, sir. There's an interesting development on the Chinese front, which we saw earlier on a few days ago, actually. And this is the fact that China is going to be sending troops to Russia to take part in a joint military exercise. How significant is that, given what is going on between Russia and Ukraine at the moment?
I thought there are other nations who are joining. So it's not just going to be Russia, China.
Correct, sir. There are other countries involved in that particular joint exercise, sir.
Precisely. To me, you see, there are different parameters of this new world order that are being, like the chess game, are being thrown onto the board in terms of moves and movements. 3 weeks ago or thereabouts, the United States and Indonesia, joined by several other countries, France, Canada, the United Kingdom, had a joint, South Korea, had a joint, what they called joint military exercise. I will call it a multi-joint military exercise. And I think this is a reply to that. Now, okay, you could put together your own multinational